Matuke could barely contain his excitement. His daughter Elizabeth had passed her A-levels with flying colors, securing a place at St. Hazel University, one of Zimbabwe's most prestigious institutions. It was a dream come true, a symbol that his years of toil, as a cotton farmer and grocery shop owner, had finally borne fruit. "This is a chance of a lifetime," Abel told his wife Ruvimbo, as they sat outside their modest rural home, the sun setting behind their thatched roof. "She'll make connections that will open doors for her." But Ruvimbo wasn't as thrilled. She stirred the sadza on the fire, her face clouded with worry. "Abel, our daughter has never lived among the rich. She's a simple village girl. Those children at St. Hazel, do you think they will welcome her?" Abel dismissed her concerns. "You worry too much, my wife. She will adapt. This is her opportunity to rise above where we are." Elizabeth, full of hope and excitement, packed her belongings into a second-hand suitcase. She had always been the pride of her village, admired for her intelligence and beauty, but nothing prepared her for the shock that awaited her at St. Hazel. From the moment she set foot on campus, she realized she was different. Her carefully ironed outfits, ones she had always considered decent and elegant, looked like rags next to the designer clothes worn by her new classmates. Her plain shoes couldn't compare to the Louis Vuitton heels and Nike sneakers that adorned the feet of her peers. The whispers began almost immediately. "Who is that? Why is she dressed like a church choir member? Her dress looks like it was made by her grandmother." Elizabeth felt the sting of humiliation, but she held her head high. She reminded herself that she had come to learn, not to impress. Mockery and isolation. One day, as she walked to class, she overheard a group of rich girls laughing behind her. "Mary the Virgin," Candace, the ringleader, called out, smirking as she leaned against her BMW convertible. "Tell me, Elizabeth, do you even know the taste of a man?" Elizabeth's blood boiled. She turned to face Candace, her voice steady. "For me to be like you any night will do, but for you to be like me, never." The students erupted into laughter, not at Elizabeth, but at Candace. For the first time, Elizabeth felt a flicker of power, but that moment was short-lived. The bullying escalated. Candace and her friends sprayed perfume in her path, implying she smelled. When a heavy rain caught her off guard one day, soaking her through as she walked back from town, someone took a picture and turned her into a meme. St. Hazel's drowned rat. The ridicule followed her everywhere. When the university closed for holidays, Elizabeth was offered a ride home by some students in a convoy of expensive cars. Her father, seeing the luxury vehicles pull into their compound, was overwhelmed with pride. But it was all a cruel trick. Candace had secretly taken pictures of Elizabeth's home, the mud walls, the wooden door, the cattle grazing in the background. By nightfall, the images were all over social media, captioned, "From pigsties to St. Hazel, miracles happen." Elizabeth wanted to die. Elizabeth sat in her dorm room staring at her phone screen. The pictures of her home were still flooding WhatsApp groups and social media pages. The comments were brutal. "From cattle pen to St. Hazel, I also need this God. I didn't know we had villagers at St. Hazel. Is this a cattle pen or a house? How does she even afford tuition? Must be a government handout." She found a blesser, another one replied in comments. There was a sharp pain in her heart. Tears blurred her vision. She had tried so hard to ignore the whispers, but this was humiliation on a national scale. A knock at the door startled her. Candace stood there, leaning against the doorframe, a smug smile on her face. She was dressed in a tight designer dress, her diamond earrings sparkling. "Elizabeth, darling," she purred, stepping inside without an invitation. "I think it's time we talked." Elizabeth folded her arms. "If you came here to gloat, just leave." Candace laughed. "Relax, sweetheart. I actually like you. You've got fire, and I'm offering you a way out of this miserable life you're living." Elizabeth frowned. "And what way is that?" Candace leaned closer. "You hang around me, and I'll transform you. No more wearing charity case clothes. No more walking in the rain like a stray dog. No more humiliation. Just say the word and I'll make your life at St. Hazel sweet." Elizabeth hesitated. She had spent months suffering, struggling, being mocked. Was this her chance to finally belong? At first, it seemed innocent enough. Candace took Elizabeth shopping, handing her expensive clothes, makeup, and jewelry without letting her pay a cent. "Where's all this money coming from?" Elizabeth asked one evening, as Candace handed her a gold-plated wristwatch. Candace smirked. "Let's just say powerful men like to be around powerful women." Elizabeth didn't ask further. She didn't want to ruin the magic. Soon, Candace taught her how to drive, took her to lavish parties, introduced her to elite circles. Elizabeth felt reborn, but something felt off. One night, Candace invited her to an exclusive mansion party. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cigars, and power. The women there were stunning, draped in luxury, but there was something cold and unsettling about them. Candace whispered in her ear, "Tonight, we make real money." Elizabeth's stomach twisted. "Doing what?" Candace smiled. "Meeting important men. Just be charming. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You are beautiful and elegant. Even if they offer you all the gold of Ashanti, do not sleep with them." It was a stern warning from Candace. Elizabeth wanted to run, but she also wanted acceptance. That night, a wealthy businessman slid an envelope into her hand, filled with $100 bills, just for talking to him. It was the first time she felt the power of money. And it wouldn't be the last. The money was addictive. Elizabeth told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong, just attending parties, charming rich men accepting their gifts. But one night, Candace took her to a remote mansion on the outskirts of Harare. "We're having a special gathering," Candace said, her voice smooth like silk. "Tonight you're going to be one of us." Elizabeth's instincts screamed danger, but she silenced them. Hadn't Candace given her everything? She owed her. When they arrived, Elizabeth saw a group of girls dressed in black robes, their faces serious. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense. At the center of the room stood an old man in a red robe, his eyes dark and unreadable. Candace whispered, "This is the high priest. He decides who gets power." Elizabeth's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Power?" she asked, her throat dry. Candace smiled. "This is not just about money, my dear. We control the universe. No lecturer fails us. No man resists us. And those who offend us, well, they don't live long enough to regret it." Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Candace leaned in. "You'll see soon enough." "The ritual," the high priest spoke, his voice booming. "Tonight we welcome a new sister. A virgin, the most powerful among us." Elizabeth froze. Virgin? How did they know? Before she could protest, two women grabbed her arms. "You are honored," the high priest said. "The deity favors you." Elizabeth's blood ran cold as she was led to a silken bed in the middle of the room. The high priest smiled as she ordered her to take off all her clothes. All the other girls bowed and chanted something in a foreign language. Like sheep on the slaughter table, she was aligned on that bed. After a time that seemed like forever, the high priest was done. Some girls wiped his sweating body. "To receive power, one must first give something in return," he said with a smile. When it was over, Elizabeth lay trembling, her body cold, her spirit shattered. Candace knelt beside her, wiping her face with a white cloth. "Congratulations," she whispered. "You're one of us now." Elizabeth stared at her, numb with horror. Candace continued, "From now on, any wealthy man you sleep with, wipe his face with this cloth. He will give you everything you want." Elizabeth's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. Weeks passed. Elizabeth changed. She no longer hesitated. She was the predator now. She had power, real power. Professors gave her good grades without question. Rich men showered her with gifts. Anyone who mocked her before now feared her. And those who crossed her? Mysterious accidents happened to them. But deep inside, something was wrong. Her nights were filled with whispers in the dark, shadowy figures standing at the edge of her vision. And worst of all, she didn't know if she was imagining them or if they were real. Elizabeth stood at the center of a lavish nightclub, dressed in a designer gown, her wrist adorned with gold bracelets. She was no longer the poor village girl who had arrived at St. Hazel. Now, she was feared and respected. Wealthy men fought for her attention. Ministers, businessmen, foreign investors. She had them all wrapped around her finger. But tonight was different. Tonight she met him. He was a tall, older man, dressed in a deep blue African robe. His skin gleamed like polished ebony. He introduced himself as Baba Daura, a well-respected man. "You are powerful," he said, studying her closely. "But you play with forces you do not understand." Elizabeth laughed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Power is power, Baba, and I know how to use it." Daura smiled. "Then let's see how powerful you truly are." That night, she took Daura to her penthouse. Elizabeth played her usual game. As he lay beside her, she reached for her white cloth, her heart thrumming with excitement. All men obeyed after she wiped their faces, but the moment the cloth touched his skin, the room shook. The air grew heavy, the lights flickered, and an unseen force slammed her across the room. A deep, menacing voice echoed in her ears. "Foolish girl, you dare steal from me!" Elizabeth gasped, her vision blurring. Daura stood above her, his eyes now burning red. "You cannot take from a man like me," he said, his voice filled with ancient power. "But I can take from you." Elizabeth tried to scream, but her voice was gone. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up drenched in sweat, her body aching. She stumbled to the mirror and gasped in horror. Her skin was pale and lifeless. her once glowing beauty fading. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, her lips chapped and dry. She felt weak, as if something inside her had been ripped away. Panic clawed at her chest. She grabbed her phone to call Candace, but before she could dial, a voice whispered from the shadows. "You took what was not yours. Now it is time to pay." Elizabeth whirled around, but no one was there. Then she felt it, something crawling beneath her skin. She screamed, clawing at her arms, but the feeling only grew worse. Desperate, she ran to Candace's apartment. But when Candace opened the door, she staggered back in horror. "Elizabeth?" she whispered. Elizabeth tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse and broken. Candace covered her mouth. "My God, what happened to you?" Elizabeth's legs gave out and she collapsed, her body shaking violently. Candace called the others, but no one knew what to do. Then, in a hushed voice, one of the girls whispered, "It's a back-to-sender spell. She tried to trick someone too powerful." Elizabeth screamed as pain ripped through her. She had taken from the wrong man, and now death was coming for her. Elizabeth's body grew weaker by the day. Her once radiant skin had turned ashen. Her hair fell in clumps, and even the simplest movements drained her strength. She had become a ghost of herself, barely recognizable. The cult members tried everything. They consulted powerful traditional healers, but none could reverse the spell. Every night, Elizabeth woke up screaming, her body convulsing as unseen forces tormented her. Candace, watching her friend wither away, finally admitted defeat. "We have to send her back home," she whispered to the others. No one argued. 2 days later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up at Matuke's rural homestead. The moment Elizabeth stumbled out of the car, the entire village gasped in horror. The once proud, vibrant girl had returned as a walking corpse. Abel rushed forward, his hands trembling. "Elizabeth? My daughter?" Elizabeth collapsed into his arms, her breath shallow and ragged. Ruvimbo wailed, throwing herself to the ground. "What have they done to my child?" The entire village gathered around, murmuring prayers and whispers. "It's Juju," an old woman muttered. She played with powers beyond her understanding. Abel's legs gave out, and for the first time in his life, tears streamed down his face. He had worked hard to give his daughter a bright future. Had he sent her to her death instead? Abel and Ruvimbo spent days taking Elizabeth from one healer to another. They consulted Nangas, prophets, and traditional healers, but no one could break the curse. Her condition worsened. Her body was now nothing but bones, her eyes sunken. At night, she screamed in agony, clutching her stomach, as if something inside her was eating her alive. One day, an elder woman pulled Ruvimbo aside. "Take her to Pastor Ezekiel. He is the only one who can help." With no other option, Abel and Ruvimbo carried their dying daughter to the city, praying for a miracle. When Pastor Ezekiel saw Elizabeth, he narrowed his eyes. "She carries the mark of the serpent," he said. "She was initiated into a powerful cult. This is not just sickness, it is judgment." Elizabeth wept, finally confessing everything. She spoke of Candace, the cult, the rituals, the blood sacrifices, and how she had been deflowered in the presence of the high priest. Abel sank to the floor, his body shaking. "My daughter, my only daughter." Pastor Ezekiel placed his hand on Abel's shoulder. "You failed to cover her in prayer before sending her into the world of wolves, and you send her to the den of wickedness. You knew you couldn't afford the lifestyle there, but you forced things. God is merciful." Elizabeth screamed, her body jerking violently as Pastor Ezekiel began to pray. The demons fought back, but the power of God was stronger. After 7 hours of intense prayer, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the church. Something dark and terrible left Elizabeth's body. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. For the first time in months, the pain was gone. Elizabeth was free, but the weight of her sins pressed on her like an iron shackle. Though her body regained strength, her mind was a battlefield. Guilt clawed at her, whispering that she was beyond redemption. She couldn't forget the faces of the married men she had bewitched, the lecturers she had blackmailed, and the innocent lives that had suffered because of her powers. She had defiled herself, betrayed her values, and brought shame to her family. The village gossiped relentlessly. They say she was part of a cult. She slept with powerful men for money. Her father thought he was sending her to be a lawyer, but she became a witch instead. Abel walked with his head low, unable to face his peers. Ruvimbo, though grateful that her daughter had survived, struggled to look her in the eyes. Elizabeth felt like an outcast in her own home. A second chance. One evening, Pastor Ezekiel visited their homestead. "I have something for you," he said. He handed Abel an envelope. Inside was a full scholarship for Elizabeth, to study law at an affordable Christian university in Bulawayo. Elizabeth's hands shook. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Grace is not about deserving, Pastor Ezekiel said. It is about redemption. For the first time in months, Elizabeth wept with hope. She had been given another chance, but was she strong enough to take it? The shadows of the past. Just as Elizabeth started packing for her new university, a strange text message appeared on her phone. It was from Candace. You think you can walk away just like that? The covenant doesn't break that easily. See you soon, Mary the Virgin. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Her past wasn't done with her yet. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she stared at the text from Candace. The covenant doesn't break that easily. She could still hear the chants of the cult, the eerie whispers of the high priest, and the chilling laughter as they welcomed her into their world of darkness. Was she truly free? Or was something still holding her captive? That night, Elizabeth barely slept. Every shadow in her room seemed to move. The wind whistled through the cracks in the hut, sounding like whispers from the past. She decided she would ignore Candace. She was done with that life. But when she woke up the next morning, there was a dead bird outside her door, its eyes missing, its wings twisted unnaturally. It was a warning. Elizabeth ran to Pastor Ezekiel, tears streaming down her face. They won't let me go, she sobbed. I thought I was free, but they are still after me. Pastor Ezekiel took a deep breath. The devil doesn't give up so easily, my child. But neither does God. Are you ready to fight? That evening, Elizabeth, her parents, and the pastor held a powerful prayer vigil. The whole village gathered, some out of faith, others out of curiosity. As they prayed, a storm suddenly brewed. The wind howled, and the air felt heavy. Then Candace appeared at the edge of the crowd, standing under a tree, a cruel smile on her lips. You think you can just pray and walk away, Elizabeth? She said. You belong to us. You swore an oath. I renounce that oath, Elizabeth shouted, her voice shaking but firm. Candace laughed darkly. Then prove it. You think your God is stronger? Let's see if he can protect you tonight. The battle of light and darkness. At that moment, Elizabeth collapsed. Her body convulsed violently, her eyes rolling back. A thick, unnatural darkness seemed to swirl around her. Candace began to chant, but the pastor and villagers prayed louder. Elizabeth felt like she was being dragged into a bottomless pit, shadowy hands pulling at her. But she remembered Pastor Ezekiel's words. Call on his name. With all her strength, Elizabeth screamed, Jesus, help me! A blinding light exploded in the room. Candace screamed in agony, clutching her chest as if she were burning. The darkness vanished. Elizabeth opened her eyes. She was free. Candace, gasping for breath, staggered backward. For the first time, she looked afraid. You have no power over me anymore, Elizabeth whispered. Candace turned and ran into the night. She was never seen again. A new beginning. 3 weeks later, Elizabeth stepped onto the campus of her new university in Bulawayo. No more luxury cars, no more expensive parties, no more shortcuts. This time, she would earn her success the right way. Years later, she stood in front of a courtroom, wearing her black robe. She had finally become a lawyer, but before every case, before every decision, she never forgot to pray, because she had learned the hard way. Not everything that glitters is gold. As Elizabeth leaves the courtroom one evening, she sees a familiar figure sitting in the shadows. A woman with long braided hair, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Candace, did you really think this was over? The end, or is it?